Hi guys. Last time we heard about two young boys in the American Revolution, and today we're going to hear about two young girls that were a part of the American Revolution. So first we have the story of Sybil Ludington. Sybil Ludington, outdistancing Paul Revere. Nearly everyone has heard of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. That's mainly because Henry Longfellow wrote a poem about it soon after it happened. But far fewer people know that 2 years later, a 16-year-old girl rode much further over rougher roads. Alone and unarmed, Sybil Ludington raced through the night for freedom. So let's get started with the story of Sybil. Just after dark, on the evening of April 26, 1777, Colonel Henry Ludington, commander of a regiment of militiamen near New York, Connecticut border, heard a rap at his door. Outside stood a saluting messenger, rain streaming from his cape. His words came fast. British soldiers had just torched the warehouse in Danbury, Connecticut. Food, guns, and liquor belonging to the Continental Army were being destroyed. Drunken soldiers were burning homes, too. Could Colonel Ludington round up his men right away? Well, that was easier said than done. Colonel Ludington's militiamen were farmers and woodsmen whose homes were scattered throughout the countryside. Someone would have to go get them while the colonel stayed behind to organize them once they arrived. But who? Who besides himself knew where they all lived and could cover so many miles on horseback in the dead of night? Deep in thought, he heard his daughter Sybil's voice. She was saying that she wanted to go. For Sybil Ludington, it was an unexpected chance to help the war effort. As the oldest of 8 children, her days were filled with chores and responsibilities. Still, each week when her father's men drilled in their pasture, she paused from her work to watch them. She wished she could fight. People kept saying that she was doing her part for liberty at home, but she wanted to do more. Suddenly, with this emergency on a rainy night, she had a chance. Her father looked at her. How could he let her take such a risk? The whole countryside was full of armed men. There were skinners and cowboys who stole cattle for the British, soldiers from both sides, and deserters trying to get back home under the cover of darkness. But Sybil was right. She knew every soldier in her father's unit, and she was a fine rider. Rebecca, her next oldest sister, could mind the children. Most of them were already asleep anyway. Colonel Ludington walked with Sybil out to the barn and held a lantern while she threw a saddle over her colt, named Star. Together, father and daughter went over the names of his men and where they lived. Then the colonel watched Sybil disappear into darkness. It was raining hard. Sybil put her thoughts of who might appear in the roadway and concentrated on a road map in her head. With no time to lose, she had to reach all of the men, taking the most efficient route possible. She picked up a long stick to bang on doors. That way she wouldn't have to waste time getting off her horse and back on her horse. One by one, hearing the rap of the stick on their doors, the sleepy farmers cracked their doors open, some poking muskets out into the darkness. Sybil said the same thing to all. "The British are burning Danbury. Muster at Ludington's. Otherwise, come to Colonel Ludington." Once she knew they understood, she galloped off, refusing all offers of rest and refreshment. It took her till dawn to get back home. She was soaked and sore, but as she rode up to her farm, she could hear the sounds of drums and bugles. Many of her father's men were already there, getting ready to march. They missed the British at Danbury, but finally fought and defeated them at Ridgefield, Connecticut, a few weeks later. So, what happened to Sybil? Word of Sybil's night ride got around. George Washington thanked her personally, and Alexander Hamilton wrote a letter of appreciation to her. When she was 23, Sybil married her childhood sweetheart, Edmund Ogden, and became the mother of 4 sons and 2 daughters. Sybil died in New York at the age of 77. There is a bronze statue of Sybil Ludington atop Star at Lake Glenna in Carmel, New York. In 1975, an 8-cent postage stamp was issued in her honor. So here's a picture of the stamp that they made in her honor, and there's her route that she took. And that's our story of Sybil Ludington. The other woman I wanted to read to you about, her name is Private Deborah Sampson. She was also a young lady during the American Revolution. So here's the story of Deborah Sampson, alias Robert Shirtliff. The war was supposed to be fought by men, but at least one young woman put on the uniform of a Continental Army. She served for 3 years in a fighting regiment. Here's her story. Deborah Sampson was born into a large, poor family in Plymouth, Massachusetts. One day when she was little, her father walked away, leaving her mother with too many children to feed. Deborah was sent to live with a neighbor, and then to the Thomas family, farmers who needed an indentured servant. In a way, Deborah thought, it wasn't so bad. She liked outdoor work, and the Thomases treated her well enough. But they wouldn't let her go to school because they kept saying school meant too much time away from chores. Deborah was determined to learn anyway. Some afternoons, she slipped down to the road in front of her house and convinced the school children who passed by to lend her their books overnight. She fell asleep trying to make sense of the words and numbers, but she hustled down to the road the next morning to return her books and ask the students to help her understand what she couldn't figure out. They did their best to help her, but it wasn't like having a real teacher. When Deborah turned 16 in 1776, she went to live with another family who agreed to give her half a day free to go to school. She was the oldest student and far beyond the others, but she outworked everyone until she caught up. Soon, she was assisting the teacher. Meanwhile, the Revolutionary War stormed through New England. Liberty had a special meaning to Deborah, since people had been telling her where to live and what to do her whole life. She volunteered to do farm work for families whose men had gone off to war, but she never felt that she was doing enough. She considered becoming a nurse or a bandage supplier, but she really wanted to fight. It seemed unfair that females could not join the army. Years of farm work had made Deborah as strong as most men, and she knew how to handle heavy equipment. As she worked, a daydream formed and soon began to harden into a plan. She knew she couldn't join the local militia where people would recognize her, but soldiers were needed in the Continental Army to fight in New York and Pennsylvania. No one knew her there. With money she earned teaching school in the summer, she bought several yards of coarse fabric and sewed a suit of men's clothing. She hid each piece of haystack until the whole outfit was finished. Then she told her family that she was leaving to find better wages and hiked off with her clothes tied in a bundle. Once out of sight, she slipped inside a grove of trees, cut her hair, put on her disguise, and walked to Midway, Massachusetts, where a company was forming. She introduced herself to the commander as Robert Shirtliff. Captain Thayer invited young Shirtliff to live with his family until the company was complete and ready to join the main army. He issued the new soldier a uniform which didn't quite fit. Miss Thayer was amazed to see Shirtliff take out a needle and scissors and alter it expertly. The young soldier explained that he had grown up in a family without girls, and his mother had made him learn to sew. When the company was formed, Deborah was assigned to West Point, New York. Action came swiftly. Heading toward Tarrytown, New York, the Continental soldiers were surprised by a fast-moving cavalry unit. Deborah took her position with her unit and fired again and again. Only when the battle was over did she notice 2 bullet holes through her coat and 1 in her cap. The soldier positioned next to her lay dead. Somehow, Deborah wasn't seriously hurt. For 3 years, she fought the British and managed both to stay alive and to keep her secret. Most of the time, it wasn't so hard. Soldiers rarely bathed, and they slept in their uniforms. She kept her hair short, A few noticed that she never seemed to shave and called her Molly, but she felt no need to respond. No one could fault her as a soldier. She was as good as anyone in her company with a musket or a bayonet. Often, she volunteered to scout possible enemy positions and never backed down in a fight. Twice she was wounded by a British sword that slashed the left side of her head, and later by a bullet that passed through her shoulder. But both times she was treated with her uniform on. But in 1782, as the war was winding down, Deborah fell ill. Feverish and unconscious, she was taken on horseback to a field hospital where the nurse on duty could not detect her pulse. "Poor Bob is gone," she reported to the doctor. The doctor felt for a heartbeat and discovered that a bandage wrapped tightly around the soldier's chest. Removing it, he got the shock of his career. He kept Deborah's secret, and he took her to his own home, where his family took care of her until she recovered. So he kept that secret. Only then did he inform her company commander. Without explanation, Deborah was given an honorable discharge from the army. She went back to Plymouth to help her mother. Word about Deborah Sanson what Deborah Sanson had done soon spread through her town. Some treated her as a criminal who had deceived her country for 3 years. She was expelled from her church. At first, she was ashamed to have caused problems, but the more she thought of it, the less apologetic she felt. What was there to be ashamed of? She had fought at least as well as the men in her company. She came to feel proud that she had risked her life again and again for her nation, and that she had acted boldly for the cause of liberty. So what happened to Deborah Sanson? She married and became a schoolteacher. One day, years later, she received a letter addressed to Robert Shirtliff, or rather, Mrs. Gannett. It was from George Washington, now the President of the United States, inviting her to visit the Capitol. There, Congress awarded her a pension, land, and a letter thanking her for her remarkable service to her country. Later, she traveled throughout New York and Massachusetts, telling her war stories and showing amazed audiences how well she could handle guns and swords. "I burst the tyrant bonds, which held me in awe," she said, "and grasped an opportunity which custom and the world seemed to deny a natural privilege." That's pretty awesome that they recognized her, that George Washington recognized her and wanted to make sure that her effort was praised. So the first story we heard about was Sybil Ludington, who rode further than Paul Revere, and the second we heard was Deborah Sanson, who wanted to fight for liberty and protect her country. Hope you enjoyed it.